Hello everyone, welcome back to my lair. Today I want to talk about the woman king. The woman king. I mean, it's woman king. I'm sorry. I keep wanting to say queen because a woman king is a queen, right? Or I don't know. The woman monarch, the female head of a feudal state. Um, Whatever. What's in a name? Anyway, whatever the name is, I want to see it. I think it looks really cool from the preview. I mean, the music kind of seemed a little dumb, but I get what they were doing with it. And I've really always been fascinated by those female warriors, the Dahomey Amazons, because they're terrifying. And I mean, like, just freaky terrifying. I remember reading about them as a boy at my grandmother's house, of all places. And I told Grandma Polly about it, and she actually stunned me by reciting part of Rudyard Kipling's "The Female of the Species," and I didn't remember it, so I looked it up. But the part she did was just the first little stanza, which is, "When the Himalayan peasant meets the he-bear in his pride, he shouts to scare the monster, who will often turn aside. But the she-bear thus accosted rends the peasant tooth and nail, for the female of the species is more deadly than the male." And I mean, the Dahomey Amazons were genuinely freaky. I mean, just terrifying. Like the stories of them, like being like totally disemboweled with bayonets and still fighting on. I mean, it's just crazy. And that appeals to me. Anyway, so yeah, I want to see it. I want to see the Woman Queen. I mean, one of my favorite movies is The African Queen, and this one basically has the same title. They both take place on the same continent, so it must be great. Uh, Actually, I just thought of it. They both actually deal with colonialism and war too. So basically the same film. I mean, it's just one of these, another remake, right? Um, anyway, the thing I want to talk about it, because I haven't seen it yet, but the thing I want to talk about is it seems to be getting a lot of bad reviews, a lot of bad press, a lot of things where there's criticisms and that kind of business, and perhaps these are warranted criticisms in all this. Um, and I'm really hoping that some of them are wrong. I think a lot of the stuff is, oh, it's just it's just designed to get black actors on the stage, or black actresses as well, and girl power and that kind of stuff. Which, I mean, that's not bad in and of itself. I can have fun movies that are like that, I guess, but I don't know. I hope that the criticisms are wrong, simply because, well, I mean, I like to see a good film with good characters that drive a good story. And of course, the danger there, especially with a movie like this, is that it could just be there to virtue signal woke politics. And I could see the danger. I mean, I hope that the movie delivers the former rather than the latter, but until I watch it, I can't actually speak too much to its content. I mean, I just saw the trailer, um, and the trailer looked compelling. It looked neat. It looked cool and fun and all of this. Sorry, I have to adjust things at my feet. And by the way, I'm sorry if I look weird and I keep itching. I'm like the flaking stage of a sunburn. So, oh well. No, what I really wanted to address about the Woman Queen, excuse me, the Woman King, is that in reading the reviews and the comments, one of the things that I've come across is a lot of things like, why are we mythologizing Dahomey? They were slavers. They were heavily engaged in the slave economy. They were the bad guys. I've been seeing a lot of that, right? And in fact, a lot of critics have been, pointing out that on like various reviews and stuff like that, it's actually black reviewers who are also saying this. Is why are we mythologizing these people who enslaved black people? And I think that brings up three important questions about the film, which might actually be applied to other historical films like it. One, is mythologizing history in film a bad thing? Well, one of the criticisms is, well, this movie is rewriting history. And so does the movie rewrite history? The second question is, was Dahomey the bad guys? That's grammatically incorrect somehow, but are they the bad guys, right? And then finally, the other last bit to this is, should the answer to either of those questions ruin a film for you? So number one, that first question, right, is mythologizing history in film a bad thing? Um, if you want history, if you want actual like honest history, you might try a documentary. I would read books though. That's the best place to get the best kind of history. Although you can get some pretty garbage history there too. I should have a section on garbage history books because there's a few of them that I'm aware of. Anyway, when it comes to film as art, and maybe I'm using that term a little loosely here, I think what I think it makes sense actually to change things in the actual story of the actual history. To accentuate the story being told. Um, you know, I have to be honest. I mean, people will ask me, well, don't you get upset when things are just wrong? What about the historical inaccuracies? Or I always get asked, what are the historical inaccuracies in this film? And usually I'll have to think about it for a while. It's like, I don't know, and I don't really care because I'm not as concerned with historical accuracy in films because, I mean, I'm used to suspending my belief in other films. I mean, we all know The Matrix is fake, or at least we think we do. We know vampires don't sparkle, and we all know that Sarah Jessica Parker isn't attractive, but we can still enjoy films for the sake of a good story. I mean, or at least, a predictable feel-good story. And to me, that term, based on a true story or based on true events, it just really signals that the story is going to be historical fiction. It's going to be, a historical theme, or it's going to have characters that are from history and that kind of business, but it might be as historical as Wild Wild West, right? I guess, I hope that no one takes the film at its face value as history. I mean, there's going to be dopes who do that no matter where you go, no matter what you do, right? I mean, there's probably dopes who say that The Matrix is real. Anyway, maybe I think the cool thing about it, though, is maybe that this could actually get people interested in the actual history of the story after having watched the movie, or at least in the beginning. That could be the case as well. And if we're thinking about mythologizing history, or not even necessarily mythologizing history, but just like changing key important things, I think Valkyrie is a good example of making changes and accentuations to a historical story to create a good film. I mean, the guys involved in the Valkyrie plot were all still Nazis. Um, and they were hoping to preserve Nazism, their state, by getting rid of Hitler. And I mean, we can kind of ignore that, and we can kind of get on their side and everything because, and I mean, we can kind of like turn a blind eye to many other little inaccuracies in that film. Um, some of them rather large. Well, for example, I'm fairly certain that none of the Nazis spoke English with a British accent on a regular basis. There's that, or an American accent for that matter. Anyway, the makers of the film, though, they did these things that changed stuff about the actual story, and they told a good story. I mean, we generally tend to root for anyone who's against Hitler. I mean, just look at how we generally view the Soviet Union in World War II. Arguably more evil than Hitler was, but gosh, we still go for him. And because they were going after Hitler. We can also use The Patriot as an example. The Patriot's a great movie, but I'm fairly certain that nowhere in South Carolina was there a plantation that was being worked by free blacks. And in fact, the idea is actually rather ridiculous, but it helps build Gibson's character, it drives an overall setting and mood, and it adds to the story. One more example, 300. This is a great example, right? Spartans did not fight in muscle oil and leather underwear. But the costume speaks to the modern audience and supports their character as badass. As for the woman king rewriting history, I certainly hope that wasn't the intent, nor the outcome. I hope that's not the outcome of this either. I hope that the idea was to tell a good story. I think one cool thing, at least, about the controversy surrounding this film is that, in fact, already, the whole reason I'm making this video right now is that many people are actually looking into the history. And let's be honest, history is freaking interesting. It is. The events that happen in history, well, you just can't make this crap up. So that brings us to number two. Uh, the question here is, was Dahomey the bad guys? Were Dahomey? What was the Kingdom of Dahomey the bad guy? Bad kingdom. Whatever. You get what I'm saying. Okay. So was it bad? I mean, yes, absolutely, the Kingdom of Dahomey did engage in the slave trade. In fact, you could probably even say that the slave trade was integral to their economy, um, central to their economy. And we can all agree that slavery is wrong and bad, right? You should feel bad because slavery sucks. Here's the problem. If we condemn Dahomey for slavery, then we almost have to essentially condemn everyone. And I know there are many people out here who don't have a problem with that. Um, Usually the people with a log in their eye trying to get the splinter out of their brothers. But, um, you know, I don't think it's a secret that every people everywhere engaged in slavery. Um, it's really only the West, by the way, that's unique in that people in the West started to question slavery. I think there's some brief things like Wang Mang in China outlawed slavery briefly, but he didn't last long, and I'm very confident that I'm mispronouncing his name. Of course, the West, though, is again unique because it's a long standing tradition that will grow up of opposition to slavery. And I think it's because it had those two rather unique attributes, and that's, of course, Christianity and the Enlightenment. And those two things will combine, at least in this one instance, to convince people, not perfectly, that slavery was wrong. And at least enough people that, in fact, it becomes a movement. And now, I mean, I think even like most white supremacists don't really think about pro-slavery thoughts and that kind of business anymore. They just don't like black people. And even then, by the way, it took a long time for governments to actually abolish slavery as an institution. So I don't think we can condemn Dahomey simply for engaging in the slave trade. And the thing about it, too, is that it's far more complicated than that. In my history classes, this is kind of our mantra. It's always more complicated than what you think, right? The thing about it is that these African kingdoms, not just Dahomey, by the way, but pretty much all of them, were acting in their own best self-interest. I have students all the time that hear about this period and they scratch their heads and they ask, well, but how could they sell their own people? And that question always bothers me. I think it'd be a lot like asking, well, how could Americans go to war with their own people and take the entire Southwest from their own people? I mean, people from Mexico and the United States are both from America. And the fact of the matter is that Dahomey wasn't selling its own people. Maybe they did, but I would bet that if it was their own people, it would have been criminals or traitors or others that they would have wanted to get rid of anyway, something like that. Here's the thing. Africans didn't have a collective sense of identity as Africans. I mean, Africa's a freaking huge continent. I mean, even today, there are very few Africans who consider everyone on the continent of Africa as one people. That's probably why there are wars going on in Nigeria and that kind of business right now. So, who were the Dahomey selling then, right? Well, they were selling their enemies, rival kingdoms that they had warred against for centuries. And if you think about it, I mean, what a sweet deal. Not only do you get to weaken the enemies that you fought against forever by raiding them and depleting them of their population, but you get to sell those people to the gullible Europeans for guns and cloth. I mean, think about that for a second. You get to dump this worthless slave that you've got billions more of over here onto a European trader for one of the most high value items in the world. And not only that, but you get to get that high value item, that gun, which can then be used to get more slaves, which means you get more of this stuff, the cool things that the Europeans have. I use the analogy, it's actually probably a bad analogy because I'm comparing people to a thing, but I mean, think about something worthless in your house, right? I mean, if you had your old pair of shoes, right? And you're getting ready to throw out your old pair of shoes, and then a guy comes up in a Lamborghini and says, hey, I'll trade you my Lamborghini for those old Nikes. What a great deal. I mean, how many old pairs of shoes are you going to start producing? Are you going to go start stealing other people's pairs of shoes to get more Lamborghinis? I mean, why the heck not? Now, of course, the problem is that with Dahomey, the more guns they got, the more raiding they could do, which means they could get even more guns by, using those. They could do more raiding and on and on and on. Um, and from a vantage point of a couple hundred years, we can see this is ultimately self-destructive. It was an unsustainable thing, that slave trade. But the kings and the leaders, everybody, not just kings and leaders, but especially the kings and leaders, act in what they perceive is their own best interest. If they're really good, they'll act in what they perceive as the best interest of their kingdom. And isn't it a good thing in your kingdom to destroy your enemies and enrich yourselves? So short term, the kings of Dahomey were doing great. I don't want you to misunderstand that and say that, the slave trade was great. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is it's often hard to project our actions hundreds of years into the future to foresee bad consequences that come from an accumulation of what we thought were awesome deals. Don't read anything into that either. I'm really just talking about Dahomey and its participation in slavery. And so I would argue that if we do condemn Dahomey for slavery, consistency would require that we condemn just about every other political unit throughout history, because everybody practiced slavery. Everybody. There's not a human. Go look up Hammurabi's code, and this is like the oldest law code we have, and it's the oldest, mostly complete one. Anyway, and it'll have in there a whole bunch of stuff dealing with slavery, because slavery was a human institution since history began, essentially, in all societies. And just think about it for a second. We don't want to glorify Dahomey because they participated in slavery and the slave trade. We have plenty of movies that glorify the Vikings, and let's face it, the Vikings were badass. We all like ourselves some Vikings, but they were also massive slavers. And they raided and captured slaves from all across Europe. Are the Vikings the bad guys then too? Well, yes, actually, the Vikings are the bad guys. I don't like the Vikings very much, but not because of the slave thing. It's just they're just jerks. Anyway, but think about that. Can we still appreciate and enjoy stories about Vikings with the knowledge that slavery is bad and they were engaged in it? I think so. I've seen many a good story about Vikings that are great. Beowulf, for example, is an amazing story, and gosh darn it, it was the Anglo-Saxons that probably did that, but it's about Vikings, right? We can still glorify them. Well, what a segue into number 3. Should the answers to either of those two questions, right, ruin a movie for you? I guess if you want it to, go for it. If you want to ruin your movie viewing experience, go for it, but maybe, I don't know, take up baseball, or there's plenty of other pastimes you could do other than movie watching. And I will say that in rare instances, a film does rewrite history with very bad consequences. Probably the best example I have is Birth of a Nation, for example, which mythologized the KKK and did in fact play a role in the reconstitution of that group. When it's like the African Queen or something, that was it took place in a historical setting and all of this, or the Patriot based on true events. We Were Soldiers. I'm picking on Mel Gibson again, but his films are good. They mythologize things, right? But I don't think they're changing history. I will say, however, that in the case of The Woman King, I don't think that it will rewrite history. Again, I hope that wasn't the intent. That'd be a pretty dumb intent for the producers if they really wanted to do that. And honestly, as long as there's good men and women like you that are willing to watch a movie and say, wait a minute, I think we should be safe, right? And again, if you want to read the history of Dahomey, find a book, right? There's plenty of them out there that are just fine. I'll link one in the description if anybody wants it. Anyway, so I also don't think that Dahomey is a bad choice for a historical film, regardless of that kingdom's participation in the slave trade. And almost central role in the slave trade as well. For one, I mean, if you're just talking about Africa as Africa, there's a mystique about it. There really is. That's why I don't know. That's why Conrad and Hemingway like to write novels in Africa. Um, there's lots of rich symbolism that can come from Africa. The Dahomey Amazons themselves were genuinely terrifying. Um, I find that compelling, so I'm interested in the film, and I do. I mean, I hope it's good. But one way or another, I'll let you know. And if you want to hate the film, go ahead. But I wouldn't let the bad history dissuade you. Anyway, I hope you've all found this enjoyable. Maybe I've been able to bring some peace to your movie watching experience. Maybe I just kicked a hornet's nest a little bit more and made it worse for you. If that's the case, I apologize. Whatever the case, I wish you joy in your life, and I hope to see you again soon.